In this session, we want to talk about cameras. You can add camera from this icon here. Click it, you can see it on Object Manager, and you can see a yellow border around the viewport. So if I now move in the scene, zoom out a little bit, I can see the added camera also in the viewport. And when I click on it, I can see the boundaries it is covering to view. There is an icon like this in the viewport in front of the camera, and when you click on it, you switch between seeing from this camera view or default camera. This camera name is RS camera here. RS camera, default camera. RS here means redshift. Okay, you can move and rotate camera like any other object. Instead of working with move and rotate tool, you can select the camera, move it, or I can rotate the camera. Control Z. You can also move cameras easier and more intuitively. Let's say this is the scene and I want the camera to cover the cube inside of it. I switch to camera view by clicking on this icon here, and now I pan, orbit, and zoom in the scene. Camera position also updated. When I get out the RS camera here by clicking on this icon, you can see the camera position changed. You can also add as many camera as you want, and I can rename them like camera for X, or add another camera 32. I can move and see each of them separately, and I can get into their view by clicking on this icon here. Each one is showing a different angle. There is an alternative way to switch between camera. You can click on default or whatever name here, cameras, and select which one to see from it. Or from this top bar menu here, I can click on camera, use camera, and switch between them. Or I can get back to default camera. What is default camera? Even without any added camera here, there will be a default camera in the scene. Default camera is the view that you see objects from without any camera active. So now when you add a new file and making your scene in it, you're actually viewing in the default camera. We can also see it here, default camera, Control Z. Another thing is that when you are in a specific view, for example, I get back to iris camera and I change the view by, for example, panning and orbiting and moving around, and I notice that I move the camera from its original place that I planned to, and I want to get back to it. You use Ctrl-Shift-Z. Each time you press it, go one step back in the camera view. So even in a new file, when you change the camera, default camera, you can also use Ctrl-Shift-Z here. And for redo, you can use Ctrl-Shift-Y. In other software, Ctrl-Shift-Z mostly assigned to reading, but in Cinema 4D, mostly like Microsoft Office app, redo for the scene, not the viewport. From scene, I mean operation like adding object, doing other stuff is Ctrl-Z and Ctrl-Y. Ctrl-Z for undo, Ctrl-Y for redo. And for the viewport changes, Ctrl-Shift-Z and Ctrl-Shift-Y. So now let's add another viewport or view panel to manage and see what is really happening with the cameras and changing their position. Come here, panel, add new view panel, change the size, grab it from this icon here, touch it here, get back to object, grab the object, put it down here, change the size here. Okay. Now I have two views, one that I'm changing and orbiting around, and one here. What if I want to see a specific camera view from this angle and adjust the position of the camera here? So I can change the default camera here to something like RS camera. And which one was the RS camera? This one. Now I can move or change the position of the RS camera here and see the result here. Or I can change the position and rotation of the camera from the viewport that is selected with normal orbiting, panning and zooming tool. And as I do that, you can see the camera position changes here. Get out the RS camera here. You can also shift to different camera views with this icon here, as I mentioned. So now I change the camera position from here and you can see it right here. But what would be the render view when I hit the render button in the Cinema 4D? This window, which of these cameras? You can select what is the render view from coming to view here and select the use as render view. Now, whatever we see here is whatever we see in the render view. So I am on RS camera here. It means the RS camera is the render view that we can see in the final render. You can select the RS camera here and change the position, and this would be the final result that we would see in the render view. You can change this window to be the render view. Render as render view. Now RS camera won't be the view that we see in the final render, and whatever we see on the boundaries of this view would be on the render. Let me show you. Come to this middle icon, hold on it, select RS render view. Hit on this play button. Now as you can see, this window was used as render view and the final render is showing the viewport from this view panel. And if I switch to this window to use as render view, whatever can see in this viewport be shown in the final render. Can drag this one and put it here. Now when I'm on RS camera here and it's set to use as render view and I change the position, you can see the final render also updates here. And when I come here and select use as render view, you can see when I change anything here, the camera position of RS camera is updating, as you can see, but the final view is whatever we can see here, and this is from default camera, and we can only change the position and rotation of default camera by changing it from this window. As you can see, this is updating. I pause the render for now. Let's close this window. Close. Let's set this view to RS camera. Use as render view is on here. Let's get out the RS camera from this view. Now I can see the cameras here and I can adjust the final render with this camera and see the final results here. So let's see some main attributes of a camera. Click on attribute panel, click on three dots and click on undock. Put it here for now. I put it here for now. Pan this window here. Okay. So RS camera is selected and its property is showing here. In the object tab, there is a type property. What is this? We can switch between different kind of cameras. Two main one for me is perspective and orthographic here. What is orthographic? It's a view without any perspective. As you can see, it changes to an infinite cube here. But before in the perspective, it had a vanishing point and it expands from it. So mostly you could remember the orthographic view from this kind of cameras from a room that has no perspective on it. So if you like that, you can switch to orthographic. But for now, let's just stick to perspective. Another important property is focal length. Let's duplicate the RS camera by holding Control, dragging it in the viewport. I want to make two different focal lengths to show you the difference between different focal lengths. For the RS camera, I keep it at 35 and zoom on object. I switch to RS camera 1 here, and for this one, I switch to something bigger like 200. Zoom out to make the cube cover the whole. Now when I switch between these two views, you can see the change. One with focal length of 35 and one with focal length of 200. 35, 200. So in simple terms, whenever you increase focal length, you're mostly getting closer to orthographic view. Perspective cameras with higher focal length is like orthographic view. As you can see, the changes of the viewport and their place in the scene here. This is the perspective with high focal length and this is the perspective with low focal length. But you might ask, what if I want to change the aspect ratio of my camera? Firstly, you need to understand that what can be seen in the final render is in this boundary and not outside of it. So when I change the size of this window, you can see the final render view, this here, not whole this. So this place that grayed out won't be shown in the final view. And this guide for the final view can be turned on and off for you from save frames here. Let's open the RS render view again, hit the play button. As you can see, by changing the window here, the aspect ratio of the final render won't be changed, and only the things that are in this boundary would be shown. So how could I change the aspect ratio of the camera? You need to change it from render settings. Click on this icon with the gear on it, come to output, and you can enter the width and height for your camera aspect ratio. For example, think as if I want to use a cubic aspect ratio. I can enter same height and width for the viewport. Height is 720. I enter same in the width. And as you can see, the boundaries here are showing the correct square. The final render is a square also here, and you can see the camera view here is a square. There is another important camera property called clipping. Make sure I'm on the right camera and turn off the render shift. So what is clipping? It is when the camera starts and stops seeing object. As you can see, it defines with two planes that are invisible. These two planes, or these two, or these two. For example, let's enable for clip plane and hold the values intensively by holding shift and drag on it. As you can see, when I decrease the for clip plane, not whole cube is showing and it is cutting from it. As I change, look at here, and I change near clip plane, you can see its effect on the final render. Look here, hold shift and drag on this. You can also see planes here. So anything in between them would be shown, and anything beneath or after these won't be in the final render. So it doesn't matter if I add 1,000 more cubes and moving them outside of these boundaries, there won't be shown. Look at the effect when I move this cube here. Getting it closer to the camera make it disappear. Getting it away from camera would also make it disappear. You can turn this to near and far clip plane off, so all things will be in the final render. So you might ask, what is the purpose of this camera planes and clipping? What is use cases? In some scenarios, like what we can see here, that some objects are in front of camera and won't allow you to have a great view. These clipping planes would help you to eliminate or not considering some to be shown in the final view. You can see the effect also here. This is with clipping on for the near plane, and this is for clipping on for the back plane. There are lots more to camera properties, and we will make a whole video about it, but for now it's enough. Close this Redshift render view. There are two very common setups for cameras with tags in Cinema4. One is to lock in camera to accidentally moving. As you can see, when the camera is activated and I move with it, camera location is updated, and you can undo it, as I mentioned, with Ctrl-Shift-Z or redo it with Ctrl-Shift-Y. What if I want to lock it to prevent accident moves? You can right click on the camera in the object manager and search for protection. Protect. In the rigging tags, there is protection, and when it's added, in the attribute panel, when you select the protection tag, you can select which properties on which axes are locked on this camera. So all position, rotation, and scale in all axes are locked for this camera. So it is not possible for me to move it anymore. It prevents from accident moves. You cannot move it also here. You can turn off some options, but mostly I leave them all locked. You can lock and unlock them by selecting none on position and rotation, changing the position and rotation of the camera, and get these two back locked. Now I cannot move them anymore. For now, I remove this tag. You can use it whenever you want to protect the camera from moving or any other option. Another useful setup is when you want the camera to follow an object and not you setting the rotation of the camera each time you move it. Let's show you what I mean. Let's add a target tag on the camera by right clicking on it and type for target. Select the animation tags target, and you need to enter an object to define which object in the scene camera is following or targeting. Click on this eyedropper icon and select this cube. So now whenever I move this camera, look here. Whenever I move this camera, the camera is targeting that selected cube and rotates to cover it in the viewport. And I can move that object too. Look here. Look here, camera is rotating. Mostly when we add a target tag on a camera, we don't input it with an object. We add a null that is not visible to camera, come back to target tag, eyedropper, this time select the null from the object manager. And this setup is so powerful because you can move the camera and objects in your null in any place you want, and the camera would always be in the direction of the null. Let's, for example, add the null in between of these cubes. View, put it here. Also, okay, it's okay. Now when I move the camera, as you can see, all 3 cubes are in the viewport, and I don't need to adjust the rotation of the camera each time by hand. So this one was an introduction to main features and things you need to know about cameras in Cinema 4. Bye bye.